Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this TCCA webinar on 3GPP critical communications standardization progress, present and future. We'll give another minute for people to join in, and we'll be starting shortly in a few seconds. Right, whilst people are joining in, during this webinar you have the chance to make questions. Mainly we will be addressing them towards the end of the session, but however I might pick some also during the progress. There it is in a question pane in your screen in mobiles. I know it's in the bottom and on the desktop at the side. So please utilize that question pane to make your questions during this session. Now I think it's getting stable, the joining in numbers. So let's get started. Let me welcome today the super experts from 3GPP, the TSG chairs, Balázs from RAN, Georg, SA, and Lionel from CT. Welcome. Thank you for joining our session today.
Thank you.
Today we're looking forward to discuss a little bit on how did we get here, so the progress from earlier times, the present, what's going on in terms of critical communication and 3GPP standardization, and then have a slight look also to the future. What combines all these things together? What is the common factor, the driver for critical communication in the standardization is obviously to get better safety and security for societies, to make, in that sense, a better world for all of us. With this, let's move on to the first part, with the first question: how critical communication sector and 3GPP got in the first place on the common path. I think today it seems somehow obvious, but I can assure to you that was not the case in the past. Balázs, perhaps you would like to start sharing on this one.
Yes, thank you very much, Tero, and thank you very much for having me on this webinar. Indeed, the journey of 3GPP and critical communications and TCCA is a very, very interesting one from many different perspectives. On one hand, it is a great example whereby a new sector realizes the need for global standards and all its benefits, and comes to 3GPP, and we basically develop a working method that clearly points towards the well-known win-win type of cooperation, and this is a prime example for that. And actually, since critical communication successfully entered 3GPP, I have used it as a blueprint for some other sectors and other players entering 3GPP and using it as an example. On the other hand, the other learning is, as you would normally do from history, there are so many things you would actually take away from how things actually started and what worked and what didn't work. As always, history teaches us quite a bit. So if we look back how the whole thing started, it started somewhere back in 2012. It was the first time back in the day I was the chairman of SA, and I got to meet Phil Godfrey, who was the chairman of TCCA at the time, in Barcelona at the Mobile World Congress. And it was the first time we ever met. It was the first time that leaders of these two organizations actually had the chance to exchange some views, and it was a 45-minute discussion, but the synergy was so apparent. Like we were almost able to finish each other's sentences by the end of that discussion. So it was really a good footing from the get-go, from both perspectives. But then there were a couple of hurdles to overcome, at least from 3GPP side, as always. But helping us overcome those hurdles, and this is where the learnings come in, there were several different factors helping at the same time. So it's never one thing, it's never one organization, it's never one element. It's always several different things that have to work in a concerted way. And this is what happened back in 2012, 2013, 2014, when the whole thing got worked out. And in this particular case, those factors were, on one hand, from the TCCA side, that the Tetra community and the critical communications community wanted to get out of a vendor lock-in situation and wanted to move towards global standards. That's fantastic. That was ingredient number one. Ingredient number two was from the 3GPP side, the largest chipset maker, and that is Qualcomm, started to show and actually show interest and drive direct device-to-device communications. And that's fundamentally new to the 3GPP system, but that's an inherent part of critical communications. When you're out of coverage, you have to be able to have the devices communicate directly. So that's a key ingredient from the 3GPP perspective. Then from the vendor side, from the traditional like cellular vendors, there was also quite much interest. I mean, many of the vendors who were in the cellular space also had some Tetra business. And I actually come from Nokia, so Nokia had actually a very strong Tetra business. When I started in Nokia back in 1998, on the floor below me, everybody worked on Tetra. So many of the vendors actually have a strong critical communications background, but bringing that background and that platform over to the cellular platform, to the commercial platform, was a very desirable thing to do, because then of course you can optimize your development, you optimize your research, even your hardware platforms. So there was a very strong push from the network vendors perspective. So all these things basically coming together was what actually brought the notion of critical communications in 3GPP through the door in a successful way. Now, we're still back in 2012, 2013. The other key element was still that 3GPP by that time pretty much stopped doing service standardization. So standardization of the services in the traditional sense of call forwarding, call waiting, the traditional teleservices. We stopped doing that with IMS. But then it was clear that from the critical communication perspective, there is a desire to standardize the services, the MCPTT type of services in particular, but we really didn't have a home for that because, again, we stopped doing that in 3GPP. So what we had to do is basically recreate that machinery in 3GPP, and what we did was recreate a working group, a specific standalone working group within SA for that, called SA6. And then the rest is history. Basically, SA6 took over the need, or took care of the need of standardizing the applications required for critical communications. So these were the key building blocks that started it all. And again, I'd like to go back and reiterate the learning from this is you always need several different key factors to basically for the stars to come together on those, and then it will be a success.
Yeah, I can confirm. I must say that on TCC side and in the critical communications sector back in the early last decade, there were a lot of discussions. What should be the future of critical communication? Should we be developing Tetra 3 in ETSI? Should we be using just a part of the 3GPP technologies, maybe the radio layer, and then utilize something of our own on top of it? There were great fears. How can a niche player, niche market sector, right, like critical communication, can anyone hear our voice in 3GPP with the giant MNOs and mobile network operators serving billions and billions of consumers, whereas if you count all the police officers in the world, it's not exactly hundreds of millions of people. So definitely those it wasn't straightforward, but the promise was very much there. It was becoming apparent that obviously the mainstream technologies are developing, that 3GPP is the choice, and perhaps on this maybe we move a bit forward and start looking what happened and how the work has actually been taking place there. Perhaps Georg, you could
Yep.
share from your point of view, how you think that this strange new community came in and started learning how to live with that new set of abbreviations.
Yeah, so I'm happy that Balázs started it off like really from the very beginning. My first contact at that time, I was CT chair with the mission critical community, was when we practically handed over the work from SA6 for MCPTT to the CT groups, where practically we do the protocols and really the details of that are needed for the implementation. But what we saw from that moment on, I mean, what I saw was obviously you are a very determined community, and the emphasis is really on community. It's you are organized very well. TTCA is doing a fabulous job, but all the companies that are the mission criticals in the 3GPP room, they have a very good tradition in communicating amongst each other and really like getting organized and trying to understand what's happening in the room and how can we respond to that. At least this is, I guess, the way as an outsider from that community that I see from you, and also that you have gone on to handle things like that since the very beginning till today. But yeah, we started practically with this very specific application, MCPTT, that of course it was already there, and that was the one thing we definitely needed to prove that 3GPP can give you what you need, that at least MCPTT would also work in the same way in the cellular world or on our, at that time, LTE technology than it did in your legacy systems. But then already once we started with that, we got into discussions, what's next? What can we build on top of that? So MC video, MC data started. There were some hiccups there. There was some delays in the work, and this was all, I think, not a big problem, at least not from my side. And I think it's something where we also, again, we learned a lot. But what happened then in parallel, we saw, as also Balázs said before, the mission criticals were a perfect blueprint for bringing in more players into 3GPP. One of the big questions that we needed to answer at that time when you joined was, how do we want to handle those people that really want to use our technologies outside for their purposes? That was not only the mission criticals, there's also, as we see now, the automotive industry, the broadcast, the satellites, and so on. Lots and lots of different industries that we call the verticals, and we see the mission criticals as one of the verticals. So I think this question was answered in a very nice way with the mission critical folks being, what we say, the first vertical in our room. So you could really, you really proved that we have good ways in working together and being successful. So we did MCPTT in release 13, we extended it in release 14 with additional services, and then around release 15 and then release 16, it became pretty obvious that what we were doing in the mission critical space was also interesting for others, for the railways, for the automotive industry. Bits and pieces of what we were designing for the mission critical community were also relevant or also useful to other industries. And in the same way, I think the thoughts and the new ideas that came in from other industries, manufacturing and so on, they invigorated the thinking of the mission critical guys, I think. So we get, when we see into release 16, when we then are really full-fledged on the 5G path, and release 17, the features that we get there are not so much anymore like MC only. This is like when, especially when we now look in release 17, where we have multicast broadcast or sidelink, or how we also call it ProSy. These are features where definitely the mission criticals have a stake in, but also many of the other players, including also the larger vendors and operators, are very much interested in. So you really have gone from a very specific one application is needed point of view to a broad approach throughout more or less the whole of 3GPP, where all the technologies we develop seem to be useful in one or the other cases that you have on your roadmap. And also, obviously, we always need your input, and this is the other thing, I think, where you are working very nicely. You sort of always prepared. You know now release 18 is coming, so we need to get together a set of requirements for release 18. And of course, this is a very good tradition you have. Not all of the verticals that we are working with have such a way of coordinated working. But it's also something which it would be really good to maintain. But one thing I want to say still on that is that this broadening of your scope brings also with it a certain responsibility to talk with others. And this is sort of one of the issues that I see at the moment, especially due to the Corona situation. One thing where we all can improve. It's not mission critical specific, but we really need that the different communities in 3GPP and the different industries that run under this vertical headline, that there is more communication between them and also more planning taking place between them, because it's obvious you share a lot of common views and common goals.
I suppose that's already bringing us to the present. You mentioned Corona and what's going on here. So where are we now fundamentally? How the work is progressing, and so maybe Lionel, you start and carry us from release 12 to release 17.
Yeah, at least I can do that from a protocol and network point of view. So thank you for the invitation first. And yes, so honestly, what I can say from the network point of view is that there was something before MCPTT and something after MCPTT. And I think I can highlight, for instance, ProSy that was done in release 12. That means before the initiation of the work on MCPTT. And at this stage, we had some specific requirements to support new solution and so on, but it was always defined per feature, saying that I need to introduce this feature. You are fighting to include this feature in the release timeframe and so on. And it was quite tough to work on that. And I think that what we have succeeded to establish, it's a kind of communication channel between 3GPP and the mission critical community, because usually a lot of people see 3GPP as a kind of front office where you can come and express your requirement, and you will have a bunch of engineers developing something for you, and it is not the case. You have to be part of 3GPP, you have to be actively involved, you have to provide contribution, because all the work is contribution driven. And thanks to SS6, that was first the gateway between 3GPP and the mission critical community. And after that, inside 3GPP is a path that we have, the natural path that we have between this group, SS6, defining service requirements and also defining the general architecture, and the city working group where the protocol are specified. So because you have this natural communication path between those groups, I think it was easier first to understand the set of requirements that we need to support, and also to attract people having a specific knowledge on mission critical services, because it's not because we are developing 3GPP specific feature and so on that we are supposed to know everything. We need to have a clear input from the community, and doing that we are sure to fulfill their requirements. I think we're not developing 3GPP solution. We're developing solutions that can be reused by anyone. And I think that one of these big clients today of this 3GPP solution is the mission critical community. And I think it was something really, so it was not so easy to establish as indicated by Balázs and Georg at the beginning. And for instance, even the notion of release that we have in 3GPP was not so easy to understand outside, because usually outside we can think about a project where you say from A to Z, we know how to do, and in 3GPP we need to define a roadmap that can pass across several years. So it was not maybe so easy to understand why these kind of requirements were not retained, and this others were. But I think after that, when we are good understanding of how 3GPP is working in one side and what are the set of specific requirements for the mission critical community, I think it was successful that we have done since release 13. And at least from the network point of view, it is really easy to define different phases. Like MCPTT was a phase 1. After that, you have addition of mission critical data and video, MCPTT phase 2, MCPTT phase 3, and so on. And I think that this is, at least from the core network point of view, it's easier to do that because we are not defining specific solution for a specific requirement. What we try to do is to reuse what we have in the network. And I think it was one of the key factors also of the success of this partnership with Mission Critical Services, is that 4G was defined as a set of enablers. It was not a solution for mobile networks. It was a set of enablers that could be used by everyone. And actually, MCPT was one of the first recognized client for these enablers. So we can expose network capabilities. We can develop easily new interfaces using existing protocols to support the specific requirements, so on. So this was done now, and now in release 17, at least for us, it's the beginning of the work at the protocol level. I think that one from a 3GPP management point of view, I think that we can highlight the work that has been done in the prioritization of the content for release 17, because I said by Georg today, it could be seen as really easy to see MC critical specific requirements included in the release timeframe, which is not. It's a very tough discussion. But because I think the work was well organized, and also because people were directly involved in this discussion, it's why now you can see in the release 17 that you have a lot of specific what we call work items. So a specific work task done in a 3GPP dedicated to MC services, but also to features that can be used by MC services, even if they're not labeled as a mission critical. I think it's I can give the floor to maybe to Georg, because the main thing so far today is to finalize what we call the service requirements and the architecture, and we have maybe more topic to say, especially on the release 17 timeframe, and obviously to Balázs also to complete on the radio access part.
Go ahead, Georg, and followed by Balázs.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, thank you, Lionel. And I think this covered a lot what we really need to sort of communicate here that I think we should communicate. So first of all, it is this prioritization exercise that we had in release 17. That was really a tough thing, at least I guess it was both in RAN and in SACT. It's as usual in every release, we had too many items on the table, And we took more or less half a year in order to find out what really goes into the release. And for newcomers, this is most likely always a frustrating exercise, because you sort of live with the fear, will my dream make it in, or in what shape or form will it be there? I think we had a good outcome, that practically all the items went into the release. There was only, I think, 1 or 2 items that dropped, and they were not mission critical related. But it's not always so clear that if you have a headline that makes it into a release, that everything you initially wanted from that is then really in. For example, when you look at the multicast broadcast, that is one work item that we have in release 17, and it's a huge one. And there are several different interests to be served inside there. Some from the mission critical, some from the broadcasters, and so on. So different parties having different views on that. And there, I think also for Sidelink or Prosy, we had similar situation where like many people pushed their ideas into these work items, which in general is a great thing, because it shows that we only need one technology to satisfy a lot of industries, and that also once it is in the field, this technology will sort of have an easy evolution, because it will get input from all these different industries. So at a basic view, this is great, but for getting things into the release, it's really necessary that all the players that are interested in this are having a harmonized view and really organize themselves, communicate with each other. And I think this is one of the points that I know I stress this every time you let me talk somewhere, but I really think this is needed. It's not a shortcoming from the mission critical folks. It's a general thing that we see in standards, that of course more communication before things get kicked off is always better. But it would be really good to see more communication between the different vertical industries to shape these features that go into releases and that are not so much related to single verticals anymore. And the other thing that I also want to say is where you're giving an excellent example actually, but also something to keep in mind, that this is one of the cornerstones of how you work successfully in 3GPP, is that you really need to be present in practically, maybe not all, but most of the working groups. So be it security, be it architecture, be it the protocol groups or the radio access network, radio groups, all these different items have to be covered. It's not only SA6, and that is also something you very much need to be aware of. Also, your managers or whoever assigns you business trips need to be more and more aware of that the work in 3GPP is not only in SA6. It starts from the requirements, goes via the architecture down to the protocols, and there is a lot of side issues to be covered. So where we are on these issues today, as I said, I think you're doing an excellent job. You are very well set up. I don't think that there's any other vertical in 3GPP that has that standing. So others can definitely learn from you. But you also need to maintain that, obviously, and you need to maintain your commitment. What we saw from this timeline that I had before shows you are on a path of getting more and more into 3GPP, or being there as a sort of something natural, and that of course means you have to send delegates with long-standing experienced people and so on. You're doing this all. I just want to remind you to keep on with that, and to be clear that things will continue like that.
Perhaps Balázs, you can share from RAM perspective, and once you do that, also lead us to the discussion on how can we be there doing more for release 18, and what is the COVID impacting us, and what is it that we should be doing as a community to to do more in order to support the general progress of, but also obviously our own objectives.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one point I'd like to start off with, though, is the big jump for the critical communications community and the public safety folks is not so much from 4G to 5G. So what we're doing now in the standards front on 5G, even though is of course the most interesting because it's present, I would say that the biggest jump and the biggest challenge still in all parts of the world is the jump to 4G from whatever system, whether it's Tetrapol, Tetra, or the US variant. Still, the biggest jump is to make the jump to 4G. And from that perspective, in terms of technical standards, everything is already there, from radio standards to spectrum bands to applications. Everything is there. So that should be like the focus number one, and I believe it is from everything I've seen. But then, of course, what we want to make sure in standards is that once you make that jump, then that wagon that you have jumped on is going to carry you all the way from generation to generation to generation, from 4G to 5G, then in 10 years time from 5G to 6G, etc. But to get on that train or to reap the benefits of that train, you need to jump on it first in terms of deployments and government policies, government investment, etc. In terms of 5G, I think Georg outlined this really nicely. So with more and more verticals entering the 5G space, the most important element is to find commonalities and cut some compromises with like-minded friendly verticals and come up with a common proposal. So the key thing is that verticals cannot think in silos. They have to think in harmonized functionalities across several verticals. We have already some very good examples for direct mode, for example, the critical communications and the automotive industry, together with some commercial push from some of the operators, have found common ground on functionalities for device-to-device or direct mode, or PROS as it's called in SA, for 5G, and there has been some very good progress along those lines. Similarly for multicast, so now we're venturing into multicast standardization for 5G, and there as well, you're not alone, and you have to find common ground with the broadcasters, for example, and again with the automotive sector. Actually, the more and more functionalities we look at, the more and more commonality one can find with the automotive sector. So those guys are your friends, and they're your friends for a long time, probably simply because they have similar kind of functionality needs that critical communication has. So these kind of cooperations are critical to have a good level of support that basically makes the proposal successful in a very difficult prioritization or package approval process. That's basically 3GPP's process to decide what new work to start when a new release starts. And again, cooperation is the three main things you'd have to focus on.
Absolutely. So all those folks who are from the other verticals following this webinar, we are very welcoming and open. So just be in touch, or I will be, and let's try to find common ground. Now, in particular, if we start thinking of release 18, what is the status with that? For release 17, as mentioned earlier, we in critical communication, we managed to internally find our position, and as a result, a lot of things we were able to foresee are being worked right now. But what is the situation with release 18? If we start with the SA side and then check the situation in RAN.
Yeah, so there we have a bit, when we come to the requirements that go into a release, we have a bit of different processes in 3GPP for SA and for RAN. So, but what is definitely can be said is that from March on now, and then especially from June on, we will enter a sort of hot phase where we will do prioritization, where Ran, as Balázs for sure will explain, also will look into what is the Ran aspects in release 18. We currently have already done a lot of work in SA1, our requirements group, where a lot of features are on the list and have been worked out. I think it's 16 all in all at the moment that are completely new or progressions of existing features for release 18. That doesn't mean that they all will be in. That doesn't mean that even if they are in, they will be they will fulfill all the requirements. As I said, we will look into prioritization work on SA level, most likely from September on. But the stage 2 work the first work items will already be produced. I would say starting in Q2 now and then progressing through Q2 and 3. What will happen in December, that is at least the current time plan, and from my perspective, it seems this is a stable one. So also the Corona situation will not change that much anymore. So in the December plenary, of this year, 2021, we will fix the content and the timeline of release 18. So we will really say, these are the items that are in, and this is the time we will need in order to complete it. And that will be done together by Ran and SA. So we will have one common timeline in 3GPP and of course, one common set of items. If you look at the current list in SA1, I mean, you see a lot of railway-related issues there, also API-related issues. It's not so much that jumps at you and says this is mission critical related. As I said before, many of the different issues that you are interested in most likely appear also nowadays in SA2, for example, when we come to multicast broadcast or to site link and so on. So the issues are distributed, and also we will most likely see more issues popping up as sort of a continuation or enhancement of existing release 17 items. As I said already, like for example, multicast or positioning issues like that, especially the satellites, they will be for sure also there. I cannot imagine that we will completely or complete the whole work on them in release 17 already. So all these discussions, they will come up within the next 3/4 of a year. And if you want to get into the work in 3GPP, if you're new, it would be really an excellent time to start listening in now. Maybe visit the plenaries, get some idea what's going on there, especially in the June plenary. I think things will start to cook up. And that, so far, I would say, is what we can predict for release 18. How long it then will take, how long the release by itself will be, this is really something we have to see in December.
Thanks. How's the state in RAN side for release 18?
Yeah, it matches up very nicely to what Georg said. So we will start the release 18 process of defining the content in June. So that's where we will see the first proposals. We will actually have a workshop type of electronic meeting or go to webinar sessions in July. It's basically representing the start of understanding what the different industries want to get out of release 18. And then there is an iterative process between the summer and then the eventual approval time in December, where you would basically have to run around and find commonalities with your friends and try to find some compromise proposals. Nobody ever gets 100% of what they want. So it's all about finding your most critical functionalities and trying to find like-minded verticals or like-minded MNOs in some cases, or vendors, to try to then come to common terms with them. and then develop the proposal and grow the supporting cast for the proposal. And that's again going to happen between the summer and December of this year.
So if I get this right, on SA side, we as critical communications community, our thing is now pretty much immediately look at the SA1 topics, look at the topics which are in progress, and communicate with the other verticals and come up with the prioritization, what we believe would make sense and be in balance for all the humankind on the universe for release 18 content. On a RAN side, if we recognize that something particular should be developed, which is missing, we still have a possibility to propose a new topic, basically, and of course the same process have find a whole lot of support for it that it would be processed. So basically that's my understanding, and as you said for those who would like to join the business, next week are plenaries starting, and the week after now, as kindly the one big one and maybe one of the only bonuses of this COVID situation is that everything is online. So from your own desk, you can start following what's going on. The documents are available, and then be already a bit prepared to work together with us in forming the common position for most of all June. That's when we should have understanding what we want ourselves, at least. With this, I think maybe it's a good point to move on to looking to the future. What do we know about the future? From my side, what I'm seeing is that from release 19 and onwards, we start getting actual real feedback from mission critical users utilizing 4G, 5G on the field, as the rollouts of FirstNet, ESN, Virve2, and so on are taking place, and probably that will then initiate from our side basically experience-based requirements for further standardization. But how do you see the situation for releases 19 and onwards?
Maybe I can start there without giving an answer. So the thing is, it's very hard to predict what's happening in the future for us. Usually we are very limited to the view into the next release. As you saw already from my answer for release 18, it's really not clear what will be even in release 18 at this moment. And this very much depends on how people decide this and set the priorities over the next 3 quarters of a year. For release 19, I mean, it's obvious we are in a flow at the moment since we started 5G, at least on the SA side, where we see that services are more and more becoming distributed. So with the network nodes that we had in the beginning, they are dissolving into virtualization. That's something we're doing already, but we will go even deeper on that, to my understanding, and I think release 19 and further releases will pave that road further. So that is one thing, that everything is becoming more opened up, and the APIs will play a much more central role. Then, of course, we will be much more on flexibility when it comes to the whole slicing, edge computing. These issues, from my perspective, will accompany us for a long time. As you said, Tero, people start getting first experiences from deployments of these technologies. So now we need to work them in. There will be enhancements. There will be new issues popping up that we want to do with this technology. So those are obvious things. Then also new technologies like the satellite access, my understanding is that this will progress for quite a while, that we will see new features, new areas of business coming up with that. What we definitely need to maintain is good communication with the verticals, keeping those that we have on board with us, but also extending our reach there. And as I said before, there are so many commonalities, so I could very well imagine that industries coming on board that have a closer relationship with the mission criticals, as well as we see, for example, with the healthcare industry, that for sure has a lot of interfaces with you guys, and where new services can be developed. But then, even in a more science fiction space, of course, there are things like artificial intelligence on the horizon that we're already looking into now, sort of, in this network automatization work items that we have, but I think not in a way that it's like, not to its full possibilities. So these for sure will be issues that will be raised, but when they appear in detail and to what extent, we have to wait.
Lionel, what are your views and your future speculations?
So first of all, I think that Georg said a lot already. Thank you, Georg. No, but no. First of all, I think I want to clarify also that when we are speaking about a new release or a new generation, or so even in the future, it doesn't mean that it will be, at least from a network point of view, a terminal point of view, it will be from an application at the application layer. It could be also something that is used already in the past. So I can give you the example of IMS, for instance, that was developed for 3G, not so used in 3G, but was massively used in 4G and still used in 4G and 5G now. And it is also the backbone of the services provided today for MCPTT. So what I want to highlight here is that it's also enhancements and to make something more efficient. So maybe doing exactly the same thing, but doing in another way, in more efficient way, and so on. That is something also that can be used in our network, because today what we have put in place since 4G, but more in 5G also, as said by Georg, with the service-based architecture, where we're not talking about anymore nodes, but about services, and you can include any type of services that you want, just relying on the existing capabilities and so on. So I think it is something that we can even enhance. So I will not go too deep into the details, but we have the notion of microservices, for instance, this kind of stuff. And so based on that, we can include more easily also features. So I think it will be even easier for the verticals to see their requirements. So maybe a small requirement could be included as soon as I would say express, it could be implemented in the network. So I would say that with virtualization, microservices, also edge, for instance, like I could include in, because it's another way also to see how your application are deployed in the network. And especially for critical services, it could be also something valuable to be able to deploy your application closer to the user. And with that, I think in the future, from a network point of view, from a protocol point of view, because it is my area of expertise, I would say it will be something that we will leverage what we have already introduced, and we will be able to provide more. So using new technology, so it could be a new flavor of HTTP, for instance, it could be a new IP protocol or even something new, but anyhow, it will be something based on something that we have already developed. And I think it will ease also people involved today to be more active and to be even more proactive in the future to be able to see their requirement fulfilled by our network.
So what I'm hearing is an encouragement for us to imagine more, push the boundaries of our culture, and try to understand what this information-centric society is all about, and how could we do our work in a more efficient way, and then come back and see which of these 3GPP Legos can be used for it. How do you see the situation, Balazs, on the RAN side?
I think as we take our turn towards the second half of this generation, that being 5G, is a unique challenge, because if I look back and be brutally honest, like the second half of each generation was quite, I mean, I would call it ho-hum, and not much of what we have done in 3GPP as standards made it into actual deployments. Especially with 4G and LTE, if I look at the last 1 or 2 releases of LTE, not much of it has actually made it out onto the field. Now, one can speculate why that was, or think of why that was, but I believe we have a strong chance to make a difference now with 5G, and that is thanks to you and thanks to the verticals. So what I do expect as we take that turn towards the second half of 5G, that the verticals would get a stronger and stronger role to shape 5G, and sort of enter that vacuum or use that vacuum, whereby the typical commercial MNO-led functionalities are somewhat exhausted, but then some of the verticals and the deployments are coming in later than the MNO deployments. Now is the chance to actually use that second half of 5G and really drive it in a way that we actually come up with functionalities and features that do make a difference out in deployments and the marketplace. So I do have high hopes for not only you, but all the verticals for this phase of 5G. And then I guess 6G will come every 10 years. We have a new generation. There's not much speculation about that. There's already activities in ITU for 2030. So there is going to be 6G somewhere down the line, but in terms of 3GPP, we still have a lot to do, at least 3-4 releases before we get into any sort of next generation kind of discussion. So this is a great opportunity for you.
I think with that note, I'd like to thank for this invitation and pass it on as an encouragement to the entire community. Look, 3GPP is open with for us with the other verticals to really address our needs, change the way we work in our community, how we bring safety and security to the societies. So basically the stage is open for us, but we need to do our share of the work. So that's for something for the next months to come. Now I think it's time for us to move on to the questions. We have received a whole lot of them. I'm afraid that we will probably not be able to answer all right now here, but we will go through all of them and answer them. So the answers will be available to all questions. And let me start having a look which ones we answer first. If you guys have had a look yourself, then maybe is there something particular you'd like to pick? I need to shift it to this other.
I think.
Okay, then I'll start shooting from here. Just a second. Let's start from the beginning, the earlier ones. Here was a question from Ryan about, as we mentioned, the Qualcomm interest. Do you know of any timelines they have mentioned or for ProC and D2D modems?
So you're asking about development and deployment and roadmaps?
Yes.
Well, typically we don't like in standards, we focus on to make sure the functionality is on there in standards and they're in a way that makes deployment as easy and as rapid as possible. Now, how and when things get on roadmaps of whether chipset vendors or network vendors, I really don't feel comfortable speculating. What I can say is that typically especially when it comes to chipset, the more low-level commonalities you have across verticals, that means hardware commonality especially, and also lower layer radio commonality, the better the chances that those things will actually make it into products. If you have a niche set of functionality, especially if it impacts the hardware, your chances of getting a product is very limited. And that's actually one of the things we have desperately focused on in 5G, that we avoid such niches, whether it's critical communications, whether it's automotive, whether it's satellite. But at all costs, we would rather compromise on functionality than get into a niche type of situation for any of the verticals, because those have proven to be a dead end with previous experience. So I cannot give you a roadmap, but I can give you that kind of an answer on what is and why is it important to actually have as much commonality, especially with the lower layers, as possible.
Thank you. That was actually what I was also expecting. So again, guidance to us is again to work with the other verticals, make sure that there's a business case for all parties in the value chain, and then we actually might have the products for deployment. So that's definitely a big thing there. There's maybe more another question from Ryan, practical question. In the network side, it seems to be it's fairly simplistic to understand which release the actual deployments are supporting. But how can that be done on the device side? Is there some process progress to where one can say that this device is now according to release this and this, or how can an agency, public safety agency, now know that a device or the network for the matter supports the certain level of 3GPP release?
I mean, in general, I think for deployments, as Balázs already said, that's sort of crossing the line where we go into business and roadmaps and so on, and there's not much we can reliably say, and also I think we shouldn't speculate. But what we see, of course, is all the standards that we are producing, they're practically sort of an option. So people, vendors can decide to take a standard and implement it, and then it works, or to leave it out, then the specific feature wouldn't work. Of course, there's some functionality, some base functionality that every mobile and every core network element needs. But in general, when we come to the functionalities we are talking about now, then they are optional. And that is something where vendors can also do cherry picking, which is practically saying, okay, I have a 5G phone that works for release 15 standards or release 16 standards, but I already implemented something from release 17 on top of it. These things are possible, and they are done rather frequently. So I'm not sure. We have, of course, certification. We have test cases when we have certification for quite a lot of the features. But in general, when you look into a device, you will not immediately know whether it will satisfy your requirements for a specific service, maybe even a proprietary service that you're thinking of. But I guess also Balázs can add more to that.
Yeah, I think that was a very good description of where we are with this. From the radio side, what I can add to is that we actually have a so-called feature list for every release, which is a very detailed Excel sheet type of description of each key radio functionality and whether that radio functionality is mandatory or optional. I can point you maybe offline after the webinar how to find that that Excel, but even in that Excel, you will find that most of the functionalities are actually optional, which means, as Georg said, it's up to the chipset vendor to cherry pick from those based on where the business is. But in terms of the mandatory functionality, if a chipset claims that, okay, I actually support release 16, that means that that chipset supports the mandatory functionality or the functionality designated as mandatory, at least from a radio perspective. But then what it supports from the optional side, that's very much up to the decision of that manufacturer.
On the TCC side, of course, we are recognizing this challenge, and therefore we are working together with GCF, the Global Certification Forum, and we are participating to the MC testing with the MC testing program, which is one of the research programs, in order to enable this vertical specific certification schemes, so that the agencies would have something that would declare and provide answer to this. So basically, this is on top of 3GPP activity. 3GPP has its scope and brings us to a certain point, but we have our own responsibility to work beyond that, and this is one of those examples there. Another question here more on the verticals which are within critical comms and at the same time at the side, is a question from Dean. What are the plans for utilities, smart grid, and manufacturing 4.0 to have a seat at the table of 3GPP specification development? So how do you see the utilities and smart grid there at the moment?
The utilities are coming in now in release 18. They are already in SA1 and bringing in a set of their requirements. How far they will go and where this will end up, as I said before, we really have to see. But there was a long discussion on how to shape this approach, that they are joining us and work with us. And I think this is now in release 18 is on the road. For the manufacturing industry, we already have them in the room. So we have 5G ACIA as one of the market representation partners of 3GPP MRPs. And they are representing, at least on the European side, I would say, quite a large number of manufacturing companies. And some of them we find in the 3GPP room since release 16 already, and they're getting the requirements in. This is one of these examples where my understanding is they're having a very big project ahead of them, practically saying a wireless factory. And our release concept gives them step-by-step solutions that will lead to that. So it's maybe not totally visible at the moment what will be the final outcome of this, but they are really active, and also in release 16 as well as 17, their work items were on the list and worked on. So I guess whoever wants a seat at the table, it's possible to get a seat at the table. That is the message here, I guess. Yeah.
Yes, and as soon as it has a linkage with critical comms, please come with us. So let's agree in advance, and we have at least a larger seat, if nothing else. There is a couple more specific questions here on technology. There is one from Hans Petter from Norway on MCIOPS. IOPS is listed as a really 17 study area. How is IOPS expected to evolve from 4G to 5G? Should IOPS take advantage of 5G architecture? So any views on IOPS development?
I know it's a study in release 17, but I'm not in the depth of it. I have to admit that, and especially how it would converge into 5G. That's something where, again, most likely it's hard to have a prediction about it. That's something we have to look offline, I guess.
Yeah, and it's a study item in SA6, is it?
In SA6, yes.
So
yes.
we'll ask SA6 to answer then.
That's what I mean when I say we have to take it offline.
Okay, good. Then there's another one regarding spectrum. how do you see the band 68 options for public safety and public protection and disaster relief on the short and long term? Is carrier aggregation with band 28 the real expectation? So basically coming into where can you use these 4G, 5G bands? Maybe a RAN related issue this. If
Absolutely. I mean, the carrier aggregation with band 68 is an option that has been out there. I mean, in terms of standards, what is important to understand about spectrum bands is that we don't have any favorites or not favorites. We do all the specification for any type of spectrum band and band combination that any of the industries need, whether that's classic MNOs, whether that's public safety. We might actually venture into some satellite bands as well. So in terms of the specification readiness, we have everything in place. Now, whether and to what extent that will materialize, I think that really depends on different regions and countries, spectrum policies and spectrum auctions, and where they are in the life cycle of spectrum auctions. So I guess that really depends on from region to region. But what I can assure you from a 3GPP perspective that the necessary band specs are in place.
So it's regional work that needs to take place in order to enable the actual deployments. But from the standards point of view, everything is ready. Of course, also some product development might be required in between. Okay, I'll take the final question here, which is actually I hope that it should be an easy one. Here it is the question, as far as I know, find it just a sec. Is 3GPP supporting the preparation communication between verticals? So basically, what kind of help can you provide me to do my job?
Yeah. So that's a good question. It's not so easy to answer. So we started a number of programs to make people more welcome in 3GPP. Newcomer sessions, newcomer introductory sessions, mentoring program, which unfortunately all of them have a bit stalled due to the COVID situation. It's not so easy to take a newcomer on the hand and say, these are the things that you have to think of when you only can have emails and phone conferences. So on that level, 3GPP is directly involved. Then we have a very strong relationship, I think, with these so-called vertical users workshops that are taking place around 3 every year, that are organized by a different set of verticals. And I think they're very successful. They're in sort of informative nature, as we have now here, but also people try to work out, for example, common requirements. But this is something that happens outside 3GPP. And then one thing I think all of us try to encourage the verticals is to get together at the meetings, because it's one thing if you think of like in an organizational way or in a webinar way about requirements and you want to align each other. That's an interesting thing and very useful. But once you are at the meeting, you most likely have your own papers and you see the papers of others. And it would be really helpful that the verticals sort of get into a tradition to organize themselves by sitting together and saying, okay, let's see where we can mutually support each other. Because one of the things that happens in every meeting is it's too busy. There's so many things going on in parallel that you don't know what's the problem of your colleague from the automotive side. So if you have a talk with these people like on Sunday evening before the meeting starts, that already helps a lot to understand where these people maybe need some support. But such such communication cannot be organized by 3GPP itself, because then we would sort of take a side or would favor a certain group, or even like put groups into place, what is not necessarily our intention. So this is something that the verticals really need to gear up to organize themselves, maybe organized by some folks from the mission critical camp.
Yeah, for sure. And from TCCA side, obviously within TCCA, we will be having our critical communications broadband group plenary coming up after the next 3GPP plenaries to start looking into these things. And I'm hoping also to involve some of the other verticals to join in to understand a bit more what we are doing and enable us to find common ground. With this, I'd like to give you all a position and a possibility for final words here. If we start with the darkness, so Balas, as you don't have the camera on, so how about you start?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank for this great opportunity. I mean, normally we would have this face-to-face and interact in the corridors and have some great side discussions. I hope that time will come and will come very soon. But this was probably the second best we could do. And what I can say is that I guess all three of us continue to very strongly believe in the importance of getting and keeping verticals like yourselves engaged more and more into the process. So if there's anything we can do to help, don't hesitate to contact us directly.
I will take the next. So from my side, I would say that I have to speak for CT, of course. I would say that's one. So it is, I think, really important to express your specific requirements. When I say yours, it's the critical services requirement, but also any verticals. I think that it is really important to have a clear expression of your requirements and to submit them and to discuss them at the SA level. So the SA is a group chaired by Georg, and it's where the service requirements and the architectural requirements also are specified. But I think one important aspect after that, it's also to ensure that you have the final implementation in the specification. And you can have very great requirements and so on expressed at the functional level and so on. If there is no one to work on at the specification level, I think I can give you some example of grid features that never been implemented because no one was able to, first of all, to figure out what it was and just to have time to implement them. And I think that one good thing that we had with MC guys was that it was quite new for them to work at the protocol level for some of them. But it's not because you are not a technical expert and so on that you cannot help, because you have, when you know exactly the set of requirements that need to be supported, what is the notion of group, how to create a group, functional aspect can be clearly expressed to technical guys, and these guys will be really happy to receive this help just to be able to ease the work at the protocol level. And I think that we have a very nice example in CT1, one of the specific group in CT, where you have a bunch of people coming from the traditional telco areas and people coming from mission critical services community, and it works really great. They have a dedicated group where they can speak all together, understanding each other's, and it speed up the work also. And if you can see the difference from the beginning, from the beginning of the work in release 13 now, and the work done today in release 17. So please join.
Absolutely.
Don't be afraid. We are nice people.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that was, so first of all, I also want to say thank you for having me and having us here. This, I think, is really a good opportunity and also a good format to bring to give a bit of information to people. I think we usually do these webinars with a lot of slides and so on. I hope that this talk was maybe also in a different way useful and informative. And the one thing I want to repeat now, what practically both of my colleagues said before, you really, if there are companies or people in the room who are currently considering or fighting with the question whether they should join, really don't be shy. I mean, standards is a very exciting work. It's also very rough work. It's not always peaceful and nice, but it's something that can really be of great interest, and also I think of great benefit, even if you maybe not immediately get the product wish out of it that you have in the beginning. You will learn a lot. You will see a lot of what other people are doing. It's really a way to communicate with your competitors, with other people in the whole ecosystem that you usually don't meet besides in conferences where everything is rather high level. So take this chance, take this opportunity. Also now, whilst we are completely on e-meetings where it's easy to join, if you have any questions, it's our job to be there for you, and we are happy to be there for you to answer your questions. And yeah, I can only encourage you to keep up this good way of collaboration that we have between 3GPP and the mission critical community. And I'm not afraid of what's coming in the next few years. I think we are set out for success. Thanks.
Thank you. With this, I'd like to thank you all, and take the special thanks to Palas, as his term as the RAN chair is coming up now. Thanks a lot for the service and support and everything you have done in that role, and best of success for you in your future roles, whatever those may be. And of course, looking forward to continue the work with your successor as well as with Georg and Leonard in RAN, in SA and CT. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you very much for listening to the audience. We will be looking to the questions which weren't answered and provide answers. Also, the couple slides here will be available, as well as the recording, so you can bring your friends and colleagues to enjoy this session as well. Thank you very much, and till the next time, stay safe. Bye bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.